We're talking about Ecclesiastes today. If you want to open your Bibles, we're going to continue. We started the book last week, a book that so many people consider completely depressing. And it can be depressing if your focus and your worth is coming from things here in this life. Because Solomon goes through the book as one great big grand thought experiment or social experiment where he evaluates all these different facets of life and says, did this give me meaning? Is this a purpose worth living for? Last week, we introduced the book by talking about how everything's repetitive. There's nothing new, nothing gained. Everybody's always working, always striving, always putting in effort, always toiling, getting exhausted, getting tired, going to bed, getting up the next day doing the same thing. And yet, do we really make progress? You live to work and you work to live, and you go to work and you get your paycheck and you come home and you buy the food and the necessities of life so that you can live, so that you can get up the next day to make more money, so that you can eat, so you can work, so you can live, so you can work, so you can eat, so you can live. And it's just a cycle, an empty, vicious cycle you cannot escape from. And Solomon looks at these things and says, what's really the purpose of it all? Why am I putting in all this effort into life if I just sit here and spin in a circle and really accomplish nothing and go nowhere? There is nothing new under the sun, he says. Things just continue the way they have been. Everything that I accomplish has been accomplished by people before me and will be accomplished by people after me. I don't really know or recall the people that have come before, and the people that come after me won't remember me either. It's all just very temporary, very cyclical, and very unsatisfying. Nothing really means anything. There's no meaning to life here under the sun. And again, we said last week, the book of Ecclesiastes is not talking about the eternal state or the heaven that comes hereafter or anything like that. He's talking about life right now. What makes life worth living? And so he went through, kind of in a general sense, he introduces his experiments where he says, I'm going to evaluate two broad general categories. I'm going to talk about wisdom and knowledge, and I'm going to talk about physical pleasures and enjoyment and entertainment and all that kind of thing, wealth, prosperity. And I'm going to evaluate both of these. And so we start out with wisdom, and he said, I'm going to put all of my efforts into being as smart and wise and knowledgeable as I absolutely possibly can. And as we said last week, Solomon of all people could address this because he was given special, amazing wisdom from God. Wisest of all people, most people say. And so he studies and he labors and he thinks and he sweats and he ponders, and he gives up going outside and playing football and video games so he can sit inside and study. And he gets to the end of it all and he says, I've gotten really smart, and wisdom and knowledge, they're good things because they help you through life and they keep you from making mistakes. But really, at the end of it all, one day I'm going to have a heart attack and I'm going to end up dead. And the moron next door who never had a straight thought in his life and just sat around and did nothing and stared at the wall all day, he's going to die too. And the day we die, we're both equally wise and intelligent. The second I'm dead, all of my wisdom, everything I've studied, all the knowledge, it instantly goes away. It cannot be transferred. Now we can communicate wisdom to each other, and for the most part we ignore each other and do what we want anyway. But really, everything he's learned for himself is instantly gone the second he dies. He says, what's the point? He says, what is it worth giving up enjoyment of life to learn a bunch of stuff if all I do is lose everything I learned anyway, and I've not enjoyed my life because I've spent all my time worrying and studying and thinking and pondering and pontificating and fancy stuff like that. Is it really worth it all? And then he turns his attention to pleasure and to accumulation of goods, what we'd probably call materialism and hedonism and all these kinds of different things. He says, I just went full bore on this. He said, I went all out. I had the most gold. I had the fanciest house. I had the fastest chariot and car. I had all the servants. I had all the entertainment. I had all the stuff, massive amounts of wealth, he said. And I evaluated, and he says, is this giving meaning to my life? And he comes to the conclusion, no. He said, pick it up in chapter 2, verse 18 is kind of where we left off last week with this. He says, I hated all of my toil in which I toil under the sun. Everything I work to accomplish, again, you go to work, you try to get rich, you try to spend it, you try to accumulate stuff. The stuff just becomes a worry in itself because now you have to do maintenance on it and you have to buy insurance on it, and you're worried about people stealing it or it breaking, and am I going to lose it? And it's just a vicious, unpleasant cycle. I hated all of my toil with which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it then to the man who will come after me. Kind of like the wisdom, as soon as you're gone, everything that you worked your entire life and you devoted your life to is gone. You have to give it away to somebody else. How many times have we heard the stories about a CEO or an entrepreneur who pours his life into building his business and his empire, and he's successful and he's miserable. His family hates him, and he lost his wife and she left him, and his kids don't speak to him anymore. But he's poured his life into this company. It's been very, very successful, and he's massively wealthy. And he dies, and he leaves it to his kid, and his kid is not as driven or as competent or doesn't care as much, and he just drives the company into the ground, and he broke, and it's all gone. How many times have we heard that story? That's what he's talking about. I have to leave everything to somebody that comes after me. And who knows whether he'll be wise or a fool? Yet he'll be a master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This guy, whether he's smart or not, he's going to own everything I worked for, and he's going to be in charge of it. This is also a vanity. So I turned and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by somebody who did not toil for it. This also is a vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils under the sun? For all of his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart doesn't rest. This also is vanity. All the stuff I worked for and all the work I had to put into getting the stuff that I worked for, it just haunts me because it's taking my life, it's sapping my strength, and it gives nothing in return. Is it fun to have? I guess, kind of. But can you really enjoy it if you don't have time to enjoy it because you're working to maintain the income it takes to get it? Not really. And it's kind of depressing as we look at all these things that we spend our lives on. Our lives here, 90%, what percentage of our lives do we spend on stuff that Solomon's talking about that doesn't really bring meaning to our lives? And I'm not saying we shouldn't, that we should all quit our jobs and just go live under a bridge somewhere. I'm not saying that. But if that's what you're looking for your meaning, you're going to be very, very disappointed. And then Solomon says something really bizarre in the next verse. And this is where we ended last week. We didn't get to this so that I could spend time today making this point. Because it sounds totally contradictory to everything else he said, doesn't it? So far he said everything's meaningless. I hate it all. Get rid of it. It's worthless. It's empty. It's vanity. It's not worth my time. And it just makes me, I hate it all. Just get rid of it. And then he says this in chapter 2, verse 24. He says, there is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find, what's the word? What's the word? Eat and drink and find, in ESV it says enjoyment. Eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. Now back in 18 it just said, I hate all my toil with which I toil under the sun. And then he goes on a long rant about how empty and meaningless it is. And then in verse 24 it says, there's nothing better for a person than to eat and drink and enjoy his toil. Well, which is it? Do you hate it or do you enjoy it? I don't understand. Continuing on, he said, this also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner he has given the busyness of gathering and collecting, only to give to the one who pleases God. This also is vanity and striving after the wind. So why does in the one passage he say, this is a miserable lot, I hate it all? And in this passage, verse 24 and following, he says, the best you can do is enjoy all this toil with which you're working. Is it miserable or is it enjoyable? How do we reconcile the two? And for the longest time, I just thought this is a really, really weird, I can't fit the two together. Is he just being like sarcastic in a weird way? I hate it, it's worthless, it's meaningless, so here you go, enjoy it, people. And he kind of stomps off with a frown on his face. Whatever, just, I don't care, it's worthless, so just, whatever. I hate it, so, enjoy it, he says in a sarcastic, angry, cynical way. Is that what he's doing? Is he leaving us with just anger and cynicism about life? I don't really think so. That wouldn't do us any good. Why would he bother writing that? Nothing better for a person than he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. I saw that this is from the hand of God. Is that all that God has to offer us, is cynicism and anger and emptiness? No, that doesn't sound right either. So how do we reconcile these passages? And finally it came to me, he's not contradicting himself at all. This is the point of the book, isn't it? God puts us in a world and in a life where we have to work for stuff. We are material, physical people. We have to eat supper every night and lunch, or else we starve. And in order to get the supper and the lunch, and the car and the clothes and the stuff we have to go to work every day. We have to do the toil. We have to do the work. We have to clock 8, 9, 10, 11 hours at work every day and come home. We have to mow the yard. We have to feed the dog. We have to fix the roof and the plumbing and all the stuff. All the things we have to do are things that we have to do, and God has put us in this world, in a world that we have to do that, especially in our fallen world. Before the fall, people had to work too, but even after the fall, if you remember Genesis chapter 3, God said, all right, Adam, you still have to work, but now it's going to be much more difficult. Things are not going to go well for you. By the sweat of your brow, you're going to have to raise your food and survive and provide for yourself and your family. It's going to be difficult. So God has put us in this world to do the work and to get the stuff. So why on the one hand is the stuff horrible and empty, and on the other side hand he says enjoy it? And again, I don't think those are contradictory. I think those are exactly the whole point. If you're looking for meaningfulness and purpose in the work, it will prove to be empty. But if you're not looking for purpose in life, if you derive your purpose and meaning in life elsewhere, that frees you up to enjoy it. You can enjoy things without finding meaning in them. How many of you gone out to have ice cream at Dairy Queen or preferably the Chief, because that's much better ice cream? How many of you gone out to the Chief to get a ice cream cone when it's nice and hot outside? Yeah, everybody does, because that's enjoyable, right? How many of you base your life's goal and your meaning and your reason for existence on an ice cream cone? Hopefully not very many of you. Some people, by the way, will live to eat all the fancy stuff. Their God is their stomach, the Bible says. There are people like that. And if you are like that, where eating and fancy and fine foods, and that's your whole life, and you're hoping to find meaning for living in your food, you'll be sorely disappointed. It will disappoint you. You will have an empty, sad, pitiful, meaningless life. But if you can find your meaning and purpose elsewhere, and your ice cream is just for enjoyment, but not meaning and purpose, that's good. Because God gave you things to enjoy. And people sometimes think, and there are whole sects and religion built around this, that because the spiritual things are so important and that's what gives you meaning, therefore physical enjoyment and pleasure are what? They say, it's evil, it's sinful. You should not be enjoying things because spirituality is where it's at, and so anything physical is evil, and you should be miserable all the time on earth. And if you're smiling and you're enjoying and having fun, well, something's just wrong with you because you're carnal. The Bible doesn't teach that. That's the problem. So Solomon says here, if you're trying to find your purpose and meaning in life in these temporal things, you're going to be empty and in its vanity and it's meaningless and pointless. But if you have a better source of purpose in life, and he hasn't told us what that is yet, we'll get to that later in the book, but if you have a better purpose to live for and you're not looking to these things for purpose, but rather just enjoyment, then it can be enjoyable to you and a good thing. There is no virtue in being miserable in this life. There just isn't. Now, I caveat to that, there are times when suffering is necessary. There's trials, there's consequences of sin, both yours and other people. This is a fallen world where suffering is sometimes necessary. I totally understand that, and we can read through multiple passages in the Bible about that. We're not going to James, and so many passages talk about suffering and trials, and Peter, 1st and 2nd Peter talk about this. But in and of itself, there's no virtue to suffering or being miserable. You don't have to beat yourself every day. You don't have to crawl around on broken glass. You don't have to take vows of poverty and be miserable and sad all the time. God gave you things to enjoy. Walk in the grass, feel the sunshine, look at the rainbows, eat your ice cream. Have fun, he says. Enjoy the stuff that God gave you to enjoy. There is no virtue in taking what God gave you to enjoy, pushing it away, saying, no, God, I don't want your enjoyment. I prefer to be miserable all the time. There's no virtue, there's no morality, there's nothing respectable or admirable about that. If God gave it to you to enjoy it. Have fun, go water skiing, drive a fast car. I don't care. Whatever you find to enjoy, go enjoy it. Just remember that what? ultimately that will not give you purpose or meaning. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy it, but that's not where your purpose of life comes from. And that's what Solomon is saying here. That's why in the one passage he can say, I hated it, because it leaves you empty if you're looking for meaning. And in the next passage it says, the best you can do with this stuff, the best this stuff will give for you is enjoyment and fun and pleasure. And there's nothing wrong with pleasure. It just won't give you ultimate meaning in life. And so that's what he says. There's nothing better for a person in life under the sun that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. I hope you enjoy your job that you go to every day. Realistically, I know that's not always possible. But I hope you do. I hope you don't go to work and hate your life every day. And if you do, I hope you can at least come home and enjoy some time at home before you have to go back to your job. Enjoy your life as best you can. Continuing on. Chapter 3. But that's a central concept to Ecclesiastes. And I hope I didn't spend too much time on it, but I hope you all get that. The difference between enjoyment and purpose, because those are two very, very different things. And the mistake that people make too many times is they combine the two and say, if I enjoyment, that has to be my purpose in life or my goal in life or my reason for living. And they're not. They're two very, very separate things. Chapter 3, he continues. And in chapters 3 through about the middle of chapter 11, Solomon looks at all different facets of life, again, kind of continuing the thought experiment genre or approach. He looks at all these different facets and areas of life, and we won't go through all of them. I'd like to get through Ecclesiastes this morning. But he looks at the problem in whatever area of life it is. He kind of comes to a conclusion, and sometimes he gives a solution, and sometimes he kind of moves on and groups them together and then gives a solution. But he starts in chapter 3. And with his first topic that he covers here, and this is the cycle he gives. If you look at the screen, he gives the aspect of life, the problem, and the conclusion. So first of all, he starts in a kind of a general way with all activities. Chapter 3, verse 1, for everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, time to break down, time to build up. And he continues on through verse 8, with all these different scenarios, a time to do this, but a time to do that. And every time you do that, you're undoing what this did. So again, it sounds like a cycle. It sounds like he's repeating kind of the concept he made back in chapter 1, right? Yeah. There's a time for everything, but everything's very cyclical. In the spring, you plant your garden. In the fall, you pull up the plants. In the spring, you plant. In the fall, you pull up. In the plant, pull up. Plant, pull up. Cycle, over and over. And throughout the summer, hopefully you get food out of your garden, you can sustain yourself, it gives yourself energy, so that you have the energy throughout the winter to live, so you live long enough to, in the spring, replant again. And you plant, and the garden gives you food throughout the summer, you store it up, pull up the plants in the fall, you have enough energy and can survive so that you can plant again in the spring. Over and over and over. Time to plant, time to pull up. Time to be born, time to die. Generations come, generations go. Circle, cycle. Verse 9, what gain has the worker from all of his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He's made everything beautiful in its time. But also he's put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. People are different. We're stuck in this vicious cycle of always working but never being finished with the work over and over again. And while that's fine for cows and dogs and cats and stuff who really have no concept of the meaning of life or self-improvement or purpose or anything like that, they don't care. He says, I've put eternity, I've put understanding of time and cycles and meaning and all this kind of thing, I've put that in man's heart. And that's a good thing because we can understand that there is a hereafter. We can understand God is eternal. We can understand purpose. But at the same time, it's kind of a haunting curse too, isn't it? Especially if you don't have that answer of what is the meaning of life, because this will haunt you. This is why people keep asking, why am I here? What is the meaning of life? Because God has put eternity in man's heart. He can understand that I go through cycle after cycle and it's meaningless and I'm getting nowhere, and I can understand this, and it haunts me. It haunts me day and night. People say, why am I doing this? He continues, but man can't find out what God has done from beginning to end. I don't understand the overall big picture that God's put me here for. I perceive that there's nothing better for them than, here he goes again, to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Enjoy what you're doing, although it will leave you empty if you have no further purpose. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all of his toil. This is God's gift to man. Don't throw it away. Don't miss the gift. I perceive that whatever God does, though, endures what? Whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people will fear him. There's a lot of differences between God and man, but in this passage, this is one of them. Everything people does is temporary, it's a vapor, and it's going to vanish, and you have to redo it all again next year or next month and the next generation. Everything we do is temporary, temporary, temporary. Everything God does, what? Lasts forever. When he does it, it is done. He creates, and it is done. He sends salvation, the Messiah, redemption, it is done. He decrees something will happen, it will happen, it is done. That's very different from people. And people are supposed to be able to look at that and say, wait, I'm a mere mortal person who can really have no long-term effect on this planet. But God, he's different. He speaks and it happens and it is accomplished. He doesn't have, God's not stuck in this vicious cycle where he has to keep repeating and repeating and working and working. It reminds me of that passage where it says, Jesus came and he did his work and he ascended and he sat down at the right hand of God. Job finished, finito, it is over, it is done, it is accomplished. As opposed to, in that case, the Old Testament sacrificial system where, again, the priest has to get up every day, go sacrifice the cow, go sacrifice the sheep, do the ritual, sprinkle the blood, take out the fat, take out the meat, distribute the offerings. And the next morning you get up and do it all over again. The next day you do it all again because we can't accomplish that goal in any meaningful long-term way. But who did? God can. He is very different from us. God is eternal. We are not. We are very temporary. We're fleeting. We're temporal. We're mortal. Verse 15, that which is, in terms of us, has already been, and that which is to be has already been. God seeks what has been. God seeks what has been driven away. So every difference between God and man there. And he continues on through 15. We won't read it all. The next topic he covers, justice. We're going to, again, kind of hit and miss these just so we can make some time through the book here. This is verses 16 through 21. But moreover, verse 16, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. And in place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there's a time for every matter and every word. And I said in my heart with regard to the children of man that God is testing them, that they may see, but they are but beasts. We can't fix the wickedness. Even if we try to design a place that is intended for justice and righteousness. I'm thinking probably the court system here and the courts, and somebody does something wrong and say, well, let's go settle this in court. So off we go to court. But even in court, even in our highest place of what should be justice and righteousness as far as under the sun, mankind, society-wise. You go there and what do you see? What do we see in the news, in the courts sometimes? Not always, but way too often. You see corruption. You see the guy that can afford the most expensive lawyer. He does what? He gets off, and the other guy can't afford as good of a lawyer. And so because one guy is richer than the other, maybe he gets a little better treatment, or somebody pays off a judge in bribery, or whatever it is. Some judge is just trying to make a political statement instead of ruling justly and rightly, and so they make a bizarre ruling just because they like it better. Even in a place of righteousness and justice, we still find corruption and unrighteousness. And Solomon says, how empty and meaningless is this? We have no ability to govern ourselves in a right, just way. Our best efforts turn out corrupt. He says, this is meaningless, it's pointless, why even have it? He says, God, however, there is no corruption, there is no unrighteousness. He is the ultimate judge, and things are right with him. What he does endures forever, his judgments stand, there is no corruption. But here in this life, meaningless, we can't even judge ourselves in a right, fair, and just way. We just can't. It's hopeless, it's meaningless. Continuing on in chapter 4, how about this? And I put this in table form. Oppression. Think about this one. I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of the oppressors, there was power, which is why they were able to oppress in the first place. If you have the money, especially in Solomon's society, it's not quite as prevalent maybe in our society, but in many societies it is. If you have the money, you have the power. If you have the power, you can oppress the other guy who's lower than you. That's just how it works. and there was no one to comfort them. And I thought, the dead who are already dead are more fortunate than the living who are still alive. Why would he say that? Because a dead person doesn't have to worry about the corruption, the injustices, the futility of life, all the worries that come with it. He's dead. All the dead guy has to do is lay there and be oblivious. That's all he has to do. But better than them both, it says, is he who has not yet been and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun. Even better than the dead guy who is now dead but had to struggle through life and push through and suffer the futility of life and then die. Better than him is even the one who hasn't been born yet, because he hasn't had to suffer at all in this life yet. But someday he will if he's born, and he'll have to go through this life. Comforting and reassuring, isn't it? Everybody smile. Jeez, yeah, better off dead than alive, he says. Envy, verse 6. Then I saw that all the toil and skill and work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This is also a vanity and striving after the wind. Loneliness, verse 7. Again I saw vanity under the sun, one person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there's no end to all of his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches. So he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? Why do I keep working? I'm not even getting the satisfaction of providing for anybody else. I'm here all by myself. I have to spend all my time working because there's nobody to help me. If I get injured, I'm done. And everything I work to gain, I end up losing anyway when I die. What's the point? He says. Advancement, verse 13 of chapter 4. Better than poor and wise youth, than an old and foolish king who longer knew how to take advice. For he went from prison, referring to the youth, I believe, went from prison to the throne. He really advanced through society. He started out as the lowest of the low, and somehow, Solomon doesn't explain how, it doesn't matter in this illustration, but he advanced from the lowest to the highest position. He made his way all the way up the ladder of success. He went from prison to the throne, though in his own kingdom he had been born poor. And I saw the living who move about under the sun, along with all that the youth who was to stand in the king's place. There was no end of all the people, all of whom he led. He had a lot of success. He had all the power now. He had all the influence. Yet those who come later, it says, will not rejoice in him. Surely this is also a vanity and striving after the wind. I think of our political system here in the U.S., how every 4 years we elect a president, right? And during the election cycle, everybody's trying to promote their candidate. This is the greatest guy ever. He's got the greatest ideas. We've never seen this before. He's going to fix all of our problems. Hope and change was one of my favorites from 2008, right? Everybody remember that? Hope and change. This guy's going to come into office and all of our problems will be solved and social strife will be gone and poverty will be eradicated. Oh, he's the greatest guy ever. And he's elected, and what happens? Do we still have poverty? Do we still have interracial tensions? Did he really solve anything at all? No. But what happens? The next election cycle comes around, and we pick 2 more candidates, and what do we say? This guy's the greatest guy ever. He's going to solve all of our problems. And we get all excited all over again, and we elect the guy to office, and all the problems that were left over from the previous guy who we thought would solve the problems, we pin on this guy, and you're going to solve all our problems. And you know what inevitably happens? He does not solve the problems. And we're a little disappointed. Until what? The next election cycle. This guy's going to solve all of our problems. Every 4 years, we get all excited to elect the greatest next thing. And everybody forgets about the last guy, the same guy who they said would solve all of our problems. And the guy before him who they said would solve all of our problems. And the guy before him who said they would solve all of our problems. Guy after guy after guy after guy after guy. And they're never solved. So he said you can become king and have all the influence. But A, you're not going to solve all the problems. And B, after the next election cycle, nobody's going to care about you anymore. It's all vanity. It's all vapor. It's all meaningless. It's all empty. Chapter 5, he continues. I like this one. This is kind of important here. About vows. This is a big one. God takes this one seriously. Chapter 5, verse 1. He says, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Be careful about this. Draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools. When you approach God, in his case, it would be in the temple to make vows with the priests. And obviously in our system, we don't have the temple and priests. But when you go to God, in prayer, devotion, whatever, he says, be careful. He says, approach God with an attitude of, what does he say? Listening more than offering the sacrifice of fools. What is the sacrifice of fools? We just went through Proverbs. It was pretty clear on this. What do fools love to offer? Come on, what do they love to offer? We talked about this. I said I'm going to pick 2 topics in Proverbs. We're going to cover it. One of them was speech, right? Fools love to offer. They like to talk a lot, okay? That is the sacrifice of a fool. If you're a fool, you love to sacrifice what you have to say. That's what you love to offer to other people. So he says, when you draw near to God, have an attitude of listening more than speaking, okay? For they don't know that they are doing evil. It says, be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven, and you're on earth. Reference back to what we said earlier. What God does is permanent, it's temporary, it's right, it's just, it's all powerful. You're just this is just a little minion down here on earth. You don't have the power, you don't have all the authority, you don't have the understanding and all the things. You're the little guy. So when you approach the God of heaven, be careful what you say. Therefore it says, let your words be few. For a dream comes with much busyness, and a fool's voice with many words. Don't be the fool. It says, when you vow a vow to God, don't delay in paying it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow. If you promise God something, deliver on it. It's better that you should not vow than you should vow and not pay. Let not your mouth lead you into sin, and don't say before the messenger probably in that case would have been the priest that you talked to before God, that it was a mistake. Oops, I made a vow that I would do this, or I would sacrifice that, or I'd provide this, or I would accomplish this. I know I promised that, but I didn't really think it through. Oopsie, I'm sorry. If you're standing and vowing before the Almighty God, does oopsie, I'm sorry, cut it? I don't think so. God places a high priority on keeping your vows, following through on your word. If you make a promise, keep it. Why is he so big on that? Because that's what God does. We're to be like him. We're to represent his character. So if you say, I will do such and such, without thinking it through, you're offering the sacrifice of fools. You're blathering out some promise that you can't really keep because you haven't thought through. And then you come back later and say, well, I can't really do what I promised God I would do. Oops, I'm sorry. God doesn't just shrug it off saying, well, okay, whatever. He says, no, you promised. You vowed this. You made a vow in the sight of me and the sight of other people. You must fulfill your vow. Keep your promises. Keep your word. So don't go before the messenger saying, oops, it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your voice and destroy the work of your hands? Why should God punish you for this when you didn't have to do it in the first place? For when dreams increase, I don't think it necessarily is talking about like sleeping dreams, but when I get a wild idea I haven't thought through, when dreams increase and words grow many, there is vanity. But God is the one you must fear. Don't destroy yourself by not simply keeping a vow because you didn't think it through. So when you approach God, it says, listen more than you speak. Be quiet. Shut up. Don't get yourself in trouble. Because God is in heaven. You're just a little peon on earth. You can't always accomplish all the things you think you can accomplish. Your eyes are bigger than your stomach. You're bit off more than you can chew. Whatever you want to say. So don't promise more than you can deliver. That's what he says. Oh boy, all kinds of good stuff here. We better fly. He talks about greed in verses 8 through 20, the emptiness of greed and trying to gain stuff. Chapter 6, verses 1 through 12, talks about contentment. We'll skip over that. Please feel free to read through it for yourself. He gets back to the contrasting of wisdom and folly, and how wisdom is good, but it's ultimately empty. Chapter 7, verse 14, in the day of prosperity be joyful, but in the day of adversity, consider. When things are going good, be glad for it. But when things are going bad, think about this. God has made one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. In my vain life I've seen everything. There's a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there's a wicked man who prolongs his life in his evil doing. We like to say that God blesses the righteous and punishes the wicked, but sometimes you see the bad guy out there who does really well and he prospers. And sometimes you see a good guy out there who doesn't really prosper, or he gets sick and he dies young, something like that. I heard the story once of a guy who was really bitter and angry, and somebody came to talk to him about God, and you need to repent, and Jesus loves you, and that kind of stuff. He got really bitter and angry. He turned to and said, no way, I'm not going to trust that God. And the person said, why? And the person responded, George Burns, that's why. And the person said, what? What are you talking about? George Burns? Why does that stop you from coming to God? He said, George Burns, every picture you see of him, he has a cigar in his hand. He's always smoking a cigar. And he lived to be 100 years old. And he turned with bitterness and he said, my mom died of lung cancer, never smoked a cigarette in her life. And she died in her mid-40s. George Burns was not a holy man. He didn't care about God. He did whatever he wanted. He smoked. He did all the things. God let him live to 100 years old, and he killed my mom, and she never did a single thing to deserve that. Is that the God of justice you want me to serve? It's hard to answer something like that to a person who doesn't understand who God is, isn't it? But he says, I've seen wicked people who are successful and they prosper, and I've seen good people who fail and who die young or sickly and who don't seem to have the blessing. This is not a right thing, he says. And we don't have time. But he goes through this. We'll talk more about this in Job too, by the way. But he goes through and he says, you can't question God. And verse 23, I have tested all these things by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it's far from me. That which has been far off is very, very deep. Who can find it out? Who can understand why God does what he does? Sometimes we just can't question. We just have to say you're God, and that's just the way it is, and you've made your choice. Continuing on. That was wisdom. Turning to society, he talks about society itself. Chapter 8, verse 2. Keep the king's command because of God's oath to him. Don't be hasty to go from his presence. Don't take your stand in an evil case. For whatever he does, he pleases. Do what's right in front of the king, or else it will not go well for you, it says. Do what's right. Continuing on, chapter 8, verse 14. There is a vanity that takes place on earth, that there are righteous people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked. This is what we just talked about too, continuing the idea. And there are wicked people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. Wicked people who seem to be rewarded, righteous people who seem to be punished. And I said, this is also a vanity. And I commend joy, for man has nothing better under the sun but to eat and drink and be joyful. Again, it sounds like a weird transition there. This is despicable, it's not right, it seems unfair. And he turns right around and says, what? There's nothing better you can do with all this than to eat, drink, and enjoy. How can I enjoy it if all these things are going on? Because you can't control them. That's God's job to control that. Don't stick your nose in other people's business. I'm not saying don't try to get involved and help people, but I'm saying you cannot take on the problems of the world. If you do, you'll just end up miserable all the time because you cannot solve them. That is God's job. You have to trust that in the end, he will take care of it and make it right. The best you can do is enjoy the things that God is giving you and go through your life and be happy that way. He says that's under the sun. That's your lot. Make sure you're doing what's right. Make sure you're standing before God in the way. But you can't tackle and solve everybody's problems. You just can't. You don't like what's going on in Afghanistan or with the terror boats in the Middle East or whatever it is. I understand. I don't either. But in the same sense, I can't just grow ulcers every day over it either. God will sort it out someday. When I applied my heart to know wisdom, this is verse 16, and to see the business that's done on earth, how neither day nor night do one's eyes see sleep. Then I saw all the work of God, that man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. You can't understand what God's really up to all the time. However, much man may toil in seeking, he will not find it out. I don't care how hard you try, you can't figure it all out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out. Continuing on, human efforts he talked about throughout chapter 9. We don't have time to read all that. But he does stick in another there in chapter 9, verse 7. Go, eat your bread with joy, drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments always be white, let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life, and your toil at which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol, in the grave, to where you are going. He continues on through chapter 10. And he gets to the end of the book, and he looks, and he kind of starts to sum it all up. And it sounds like the grandpa talking to his grandson or to the younger generation. He says, I've looked at all these different things of life. I've evaluated them all. There's a lot of things we don't like, a lot of things we can't understand. But what is it all about? What can we do? Is in my counsel to you, as somebody who's lived through this hard, difficult, meaningless, toilsome life, and I'm looking at you, teens in the front row, not now, I mean, there's only one person in the front row right now. Sorry, no longer a teen. But in an hour, there'll be teens sitting here. If Solomon was speaking to the teens in the front row, he says, you who are just starting out in life, I want to save you the trouble, I want to save you the heartache, the searching that I had to go through. I want to give you the short answer, the bottom line. What is my instruction to you? And he gets to the end of chapter 11, he starts to put it all together. Verse 7, he says, light is sweet, it's pleasure for the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all, enjoy them all. That's what he said. But at the same time, let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. Rejoice, young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Enjoy being young. Again, there's no virtue in being miserable and moping around throughout your life. Have fun. You're full of youth. You're full of energy. You've got ambition. You're idealistic. Have fun. It's not often enough, I think, sometimes that we say that, but that's his message here. Rejoice in your youth. Let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. Just like this passage and the one we just read, sometimes we even say something like this, and I know what we mean, and I know we mean well, but I think we need to be a little more careful how we say it. It says, you need to serve God with your life. You need to give up your ambition and your goals and follow God. And I know what we mean by that, and that's true, but what does he say here? What in this passage and the one we just read to you a minute ago, what does Solomon say? He says, go out, enjoy your life, have your ambition. God gave you stuff to do on this earth. God gave you passions, he gave you talents, he gave you ideas that you want to accomplish. And I'm not saying disregard God. He says that as well. He says, keep in mind, God's going to judge you for everything you do. But he says, take your talents, take your goals, go have fun. Spend that energy in a great way that you enjoy, that you can have fun with, that you can find pleasure in here on this earth. But at the same time, remember, everything you do, God will hold you accountable for. So don't waste it, but have fun at the same time. And that's a balance I think sometimes we have difficulty in really negotiating. Did everybody kind of get an idea what I'm trying to say that I'm probably not saying very well? We don't have to mope through and be miserable. Oh, I really wanted to do this, but I know God wants me to do that. And if God really wants you to do that, fine. But usually, God gives you the skills and the talents and the desire to do what he wants you to do. And if you absolutely hate what you think he's calling you in to do, are you really sure he's calling you to do that? Because if you love being an engineer, and you've got a passion for that, and you've got a skill for that, say, I can go out and be the best engineer that God wants me to be, and I can, be a good example for him, and I can reach people that way. Go do it. Knock yourself out. You build the fanciest bridge on earth that the world has ever seen, or you build the fanciest gizmo. If you're a teacher, you teach those kids to the best of your ability, and you crank out the smartest students the world has ever seen. Go for it. He says, knock yourself out. Have fun. Enjoy it. Just remember, use those time and skill and talents in a way that God would be pleased for. Don't use them to try to gain purpose and meaning for yourself, because you will fail. Have fun, but use it to accomplish a grander purpose, which he's going to talk about in just a minute, that is pleasing God and serving him. But you can do both at the same time. He continues on by giving a picture of what older age looks like, and it's really, really graphic. It's really kind of depressing, but he's warning these people, now is the time for you to live for God and have fun and serve him in a meaningful way. He says, chapter 12, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and before the years draw near of which you say, I have no pleasure in them. Serve now while you are young and you have the energy. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened. Why are the sun and moon and stars darkened? Because you can't see as well. Yeah. And the clouds return after the rain. And the day when the keepers of the house tremble. I'm told by smart people that keepers of the house in that day was a term for like your legs. You walk around and your legs are shaky and you can't move so well. And the strong men are bent, kind of hunched over. And the grinders cease because they are few. What grinders cease because they are few? Yeah, your teeth. And those who look through the windows are dimmed. Again, I just can't see very well. And the doors to the street are shut. When the sound of the grinding is low. Why is the sound of grinding low? Because you can't hear very well. And the one rises up at the sound of a bird. Why do you rise up with the birds? because as you get older, you just can't sleep as well, right? And you can't sleep in the way you used to. And all the daughters of song are brought low, and they're afraid also of what is high. You're not going to go on a high wire when you're 70 or 80 years old. You can kind of become a little more fearful and cautious. And the terrors are in the way, and the almond tree blossoms. This one always confused me. I had to look it up in preparation for the lesson. What does that have to do with anything? Are almond trees not beautiful or pretty or something like that? No, they bloom. That is the time of year, I think. They bloom in, at least in the Middle East, in February, late February, clear at the end of winter, or what you might even call early spring, but it's still really cold outside. And so if the year kind of symbolizes your life, right? You're born in spring, and you're youthful, and you grow up in your summer and everything, and then fall is late middle age, and the winter of life is old age as you find life more difficult. And you look up at the late stages of life, and the almond tree is blooming. What does that mean? You're almost to the end of your winter, aren't you? Winter's done, and you're not going to see another spring. And the grasshopper drags himself along. In the summer, we have grasshoppers here. Those little things are bebopping all over the place. They're like spring-loaded. They're just beep, 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 beep. But as the weather grows colder, you see the full-grown grasshoppers, and they're just not hopping like they used to. And they can maybe hop a few inches at a time, and they look kind of miserable looking. And desire fails because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets, and your life is over. Before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel is broken at the cistern. What do those mean? What do those symbolize and stand for? I'm not entirely sure, but I think I know what they all have in common. They're all pictures of things that were once beautiful and useful and valuable, and now they are no longer as beautiful, and they're no longer useful, and they're broken, they're dysfunctional. And it's kind of the person where physically I used to be vibrant and full of energy and go-get-em and indestructible, and now I can hardly get around and I can hardly move around. And that's the destiny of us all. And the dust returns to the earth as it was. From dust I came, and to dust I will return, right? And the spirit returns to the God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. He says, serve God now, have your passions, use your energy right now, young person, he says, before all these things come to you and you can no longer do it. Go enjoy the life that God has given you. Have fun, be ambitious. But at the same time, remember, at the end of your life, you'll have to count for all the things you've done, so be smart about it too. And he gets to the very end. We don't have time to read verses 9 through 12, really. It talks about his report. He says, I've looked at everything. I've evaluated it all. I've written my report. The jury is in. They've made their decision. What is the ultimate meaning of life? And it all boils down to the last two verses of the book. And here's what he says. After he says, in the previous chapter, he says, remember your Creator as you live before you get old. He says, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting to push my buttons, don't I? Vanity of vanities, all is vanity, verse 8. He gets to the very end, he says, here is the meaning of life. Everything else is good for enjoyment, for fun, for pleasure, and that's not a bad thing. God gave it to you, but that's not meaning. Here is what meaning is. The end of the matter, he says. Verse 13, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Here it is. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. People spend their lives looking for the meaning of life, and gurus go sit on top of mountains and sit on top of tall poles and starve themselves and dress weird and say goofy-sounding things, looking for the meaning of life, and followers and disciples follow after them. What is the meaning of life, O guru? We can't figure it out. We can't understand. And Solomon says, I've looked at it all. I've figured it all out. I boil it all down to this, and it's really this simple. It says, fear God and keep his commandments. How much you please him is the meaning of life. It's not what you do. It's not how much ambition you have or how much stuff you accumulate throughout your life. It's, are you fearing God through it all? Are you doing it all for him and in a way that's in reverence and submission to him? That's where the meaning comes from. That's how you can separate meaning from enjoyment. Enjoyment comes from the stuff, but meaning comes from getting the stuff and following God with it and being focused on him with it and keeping God's commandments and being in submission to him and living ultimately for him, because what's here in this life is a short vapor, but what we do for him lasts for all of eternity. So if you're looking on this planet for the meaning, you will not find it. The meaning comes from beyond the planet, from something that is not under the sun. He says, fear God and serve him. This applies to every person. Can it really be that simple? Can it really be that easy? After all the searching and all the experimenting and all the trying and all the failing and all the emptiness and all the meaninglessness, can the meaning of life really be that simple? Fear God and serve Him? This is the whole duty of man. This is the whole purpose you're here. All the times you have to deal with your hard boss, all the times the kids are crazy and crying, all the times you have a flat tire, all the time you burn your macaroni and cheese on the stove, all the stuff you go through, it all boils down to this. Fear God and serve Him. And nothing else really matters.